Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the William G. McGowan Theater here at the National Archives. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight, whether you're here in person or joining us on our YouTube channel for our discussion of revolutionary movements then and now, Black Power and Black Lives Matter. On this 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Power movement, we present a panel discussion about the revolutionary movements of the past and present. We're pleased to welcome Alelia Bundles, journalist, author, and chair of the National Archives Foundation, as our moderator. Our partner this evening is Say It Loud, our African-American employee affinity group here at the National Archives. The group is one of several affinity groups, of which I am very proud, here at the National Archives, which raise cultural awareness, enable collaboration, share knowledge, and promote personal growth. After the program, we hope you will continue the discussion at a reception upstairs in the Rotunda Galleries, where you will see a selection of original records drawn from the Department of Justice holdings. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you about two upcoming programs here in the theater. On Friday, October 28th at noon, Robert O'Hara Jr. will be here to talk about his book, The Quartermaster, Montgomery C. Meigs, Lincoln's General, Master Builder of the Union Army. General Meigs, a master of logistics, was known as the architect of the Union victory. And on Thursday, November 3rd at 7, in a program titled Facing Slavery's Legacy at Georgetown University, Adam Rothman, professor of history at Georgetown, will discuss the university's roots in the slave economy of early America and their implications for today. To learn more about these and all of our public programs and exhibits, consult our monthly calendar of events. There are copies in the lobby, and also sign-up sheet where you can receive it in regular mail or email. And another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports all of our education and outreach activities, and there are applications for membership in the lobby also. And a little-known secret, no one has ever been turned down for membership. Earlier I mentioned that we have a special display of some original records upstairs. National Archives records reflect all facets of American history, and this small sample shows the range of reactions to the shooting of two Illinois Black Panther leaders, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, during a police raid. One letter from 9 members of Congress calls for an investigation. A press release announces the Attorney General's appointment of an investigation team, and letters from citizens express differing opinions on the outcome. Not on display, but in FBI records, are case files related to the Nation of Islam, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Miriam Makeba, and Angela Davis. Calls for a greater voice in politics and society are documented in statements from founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus and audio recordings of Nikki Giovanni, Gwendolyn Brooks, James Baldwin, and other writers and poets from the Black arts movement. To hear more about our records and to guide us in tonight's program, I'd like to turn you over to 2 members of the National Archives staff. Letitia Curry is the chair of Say It Loud and an archives specialist, and Tina Lagun is the chair of Say It Loud and a supervisory archivist. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Letitia and Tina.
Thank you, Mr. Ferriero, for the introduction and your continued support of the employee affinity groups and our programming. Welcome, everybody, to the first public event. I'm Letitia Curry, chair for Say It Loud.
And I'm Tina Lagun, vice chair of Say It Loud.
At the beginning of the year, Beyonce told us to get information during the Super Bowl halftime show. Not only did she perform the message of strong black womanhood, but the leather, black berets, and raised fists of her backing dancers recalled the uniform of the Black Panther Party. In performance that everyone in here probably remembers, Beyonce let the world know that this was the year to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panthers and the start of the Black Power movement.
Tonight, we continue in that celebration and explore the ideal of what is past as prologue with this cross-generational discussion. Black Lives Matter, like Black Power, is a movement born out of struggle to affirm Black people's contributions to society in the face of great oppression. As part of Say It Loud's mission to ensure a culture of empowerment and education and share Black history, this program grew out of a lesson plan we offered to local school teachers, encouraging students to imagine what would have been tweeted 50 years ago during events like the March Against Fear.
Unfortunately, we found this to be an easy assignment, as the things that end in hashtag Black Lives Matter could easily match the repeat original tweets with the hashtag Black Power. After the panel is over, we have documents on display, which Mr. Ferrier was talking about, in the Rotunda Gallery from the Department of Justice file regarding the killings of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. The letters on display all show a familiar arc of citizens being shocked by such a use of force, then calling for an investigation, and then expressing disappointment or pleasure when there was no indictment for the murder of two Black men, all back in 1969. Tonight, we hope for a timely, engaging, and important discussion.
Before we begin, we would like once again to thank the Archivists of the United States for supporting Say It Loud. We would also like to thank the National Archives Foundation and Public Programs for partnering with us in hosting and running the show. Tammy Stovall and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for their continued guidance, the Usher Squad for their hard work in making this event possible, and all of our colleagues, friends, and family for their support while planning this event.
As we said earlier, after the conclusion of the program, there will be a reception upstairs in the Rotunda Galleries. Panelist Jakobi Williams will have a book signing for his book, From the Bullet to the Ballot, and all of the museum exhibit spaces will be open for guests to see and explore other historically important records relating to social movements in America.
Please participate in discussion by using the hashtag BLKPowerMatters throughout social media. Thank you all for coming and tuning in. And now, please us in join in welcoming the Revolutionary Movement's Then and Now panel. Now, unfortunately, Congressman Bobby Rush will not be able to join us this evening. But I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, author and journalist, Alicia Bundles.
Our panel consists of Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Ericka Brown-Abram, author and daughter of Black Panther leader Elaine Brown.
And the panel also includes Princess Black, activist and scholar, and Dr. Jakobi Williams, associate professor of history at Indiana University-Bloomington. Let's welcome our panel to the stage.
Good evening. What a fabulous crowd we have. We're so glad to see you. Welcome to Revolutionary Movements Then and Now, Black Power and Black Lives Matter. Tina and Tish, thank you all very much. 50 years ago this week, the Black Panther Party was founded. In those 5 decades, we've seen much change and progress on many fronts. In 1966, the concerns were police brutality, housing, jobs, education, prison reform, land, peace, bread, and justice. Today, we're facing some of the same challenges. Black Lives Matter is the vanguard of the 21st century. So we're very lucky to have with us today Alicia Garza, Ericka Brown, Jakobi Williams, and Princess Black. And I'm very proud to be a part of the National Archives and to know that these records that document this amazing history, that some of these records are here. Some because of COINTELPRO, which is not a good thing, but it means that, that things are documented. And other things that are more positive. So we're going to start with Jakobi, who is a professor at Indiana University, but is living in Durham right now. Jakobi, you have researched Black liberation movements, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to give us an overview of why the Panthers were necessary in 1966.
Well, I do my best. I'm not good with sound bites. 'Cause I'm a bit long-winded. Well, as you articulated, many of those critical issues that currently plague our community were same issues that plagued our community 50 years ago. So as we like to advertise, we've come a long way. Well, for many of us, for those who don't know me very well, born and raised on the south side of Chicago, Inglewood, I don't see a lot of change over in my community. And so a lot of those issues are still issues that plague poor and oppressed folks. And so in the 1960s, particularly 50 years ago from today, from this month, I should say, you had Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, give a call for Black Power, which becomes a slogan for a movement, but the mainstream and most folks who equates the word power at that time with the term white power went into all kind of paroxysms of fear that African Americans were advocating that Black people think that they are superior to white folks, as white power is equated with the term or with the idea of biology. Black power is just pretty much advocating, has no biological links, it's advocating for the economic and political controls of one's community, those self-determination apparatuses. As the way in which our society operates then, it's the same way it operates now. Economics commands politics, politics commands society and techniques. So you can't control all these societal changes without actually controlling the economics of one's community. So two law students in that same year, Bobby Seale and Dr. Huey P. Newton, who in many academic circles I consider one of the greatest theoreticians of the 20th century that we don't give them a lot of credit for, founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense. But before doing so, they actually reached out to Stokely Carmichael and asked him if they can use his symbols. At that time, he was operating in Alabama, in Lowndes County, organizing a group of folks there for a different third political party called the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And their symbol was this Black Panther. They was running folks for office. And he told those two students, and I emphasize students because we get a lot of misconception about the party, that these are crazy thugs or criminals, but these were students. And they told him, of course you can use this symbol. It doesn't belong to me, it belongs to anyone who's advocating for the liberation movements of the period. And so they created the Black Panther Party for self-defense in an effort to try to recreate Malcolm X's Organization of African American Unity, who was doing similar work. And so those two students, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, founded this organization. I always emphasize self-defense because we have another misconceptions about that as well, that to defend oneself means one is violent. And I usually give this egregious example of how self-defense operates. It's a human response to attack, to oppression. In that particular instance, and much of which plagues our community today, much of that oppression was wreaked out by the state vis-a-vis the police as an institution. And so I always tell folks, if I was to get up right now and begin smacking the heck out of everybody in this crowd, how many of you guys are going to defend yourself? Pretty much everybody, right? So does that make you violent? No. The violent person in this regard would be me, the assailant. And so the party was very instrumental in advocating self-defense as a tenet to why it was necessary, and in addition to all the programs and policies that they created to affect all those economic issues that they were facing at that period. And I think I'll end there because I can go on for another 40 minutes.
And we'll come back I know you can, because he's written a book about this and he's writing another book, so he has a lot more to say. But Ericka, your mother, Elaine Brown, helped establish the first free breakfast program in Los Angeles. She was Minister of Information, editor of the Black Panther paper in South Carolina, I think, and then I've read this in one of the interviews, but
Yes.
but you would know better than I.
You know,
And,
Oakland, yeah.
and also chairman of the party.
Yes.
So you had an experience, unlike anybody else on the stage. You grew up within the Panthers. So talk a bit about some of the misconceptions and some of your experience.
Well, and it's hard to understand this, but I was so protected from the ills that gave rise to the party that I didn't have an idea really of why we existed, because a lot of those things wouldn't have, I always had something to eat. I always had clothing. I was never afraid of any authority figure taking my life because I was in a constant state of protection. And the funny thing is when we were talking about the symbol from Lowndes County, Alabama, the small bit of trivia is that that symbol came to Alabama from Clark Atlanta University. Clark College, their first Panther, there was a woman that was on the Alabama committee, and she traced that symbol to oppose the white rooster symbol, so that when you looked to vote, there was the white rooster and the Black Panther. So the Clark first Panther is the Black Panther. So it's full circle for an entire community of people in terms of education and oppression. But the idea of self-determination was always something that it wasn't even an issue for me, because if I'm looking at the people who raised me, and the woman I'm named for, Ericka Huggins, and the women that I knew, Norma R. Moore, who ran our medical program and is featured a lot in Alondra Nelson's book, Body and Soul. So for me, this is our typical way of living. We live together, we eat together, we go to school together. So the idea of there's a child who doesn't have anything to eat would have never occurred to me, because if you lived in the neighborhood and even if your parents weren't party members, you would still go to school. You wouldn't live in the dormitory with us, but if you needed clothes, they were going to be provided, glasses, mobile mammograms. So pretty much any need that they could think to serve. We made shoes for a while. I mean, who does that? Somewhere, somewhere in the middle of Oakland, they would take over an empty space, get a generator, and make what needed to be to provide for the community. But Huey called them survival programs because they were survival pending revolution. And as a child, I just had no concept of what that would mean. It's just that you serve the greater good, and the greater good serves you. So you feed people, then the people start asking questions about why they have to boycott strawberries at Safeway, and we interact or meet, Cesar Chavez. So we had a global understanding, which is why I was glad he mentioned about the theorist that Huey was, but we had a global understanding of our connection to people who were suffering from oppression, and that you could be divided by gender or ethnicity, or you could recognize that your oppressor was the one making those divisions to keep you weak.
So before we go to the present, just Jakobi and Ericka, talk a little bit about the biggest misconceptions. I mean, you're mentioning all of the survival programs, and so that the media image of the Panthers was taking over the state capitol, having guns, the shootouts that occurred. But what are the misconceptions?
Want to go first?
Either of you.
Sure. Well, the misconception, the gun is a tool, and like he said, if someone is hitting you, but it's not a toy. We actually weren't allowed to play with toy weapons, not cap guns, not swords. That might sound strange to a lot of people, but we were never supposed to see it as a game. So the idea of the gun as anything more than a tool would make it provocative. For us, it wasn't anything. As children, we were aware that we were safe, but we weren't even aware that there was someone until I watched a film, and one of my friends, her father spent an hour and a half keeping a police at bay who were trying to raid an office. And out of that raid, SWAT was born. So I learned things as I grew up, but a lot of those things weren't present in my daily life because someone braided my hair, someone made sure I was bathed, someone made sure I had lights and electricity. And it wouldn't occur to you that there were migrant farm. When I first met the other people in the Cesar Chavez group, it didn't occur to me that there were children who worked and didn't go to school. It didn't occur to me that some of the things I was eating, grapes, were being picked by people who were getting paid little to nothing. And in that system, the migrant worker ended up owing the person whose property they were on. So a lot of that just didn't come up. The coalitions seemed very natural to me. The fact that the Panthers had coalitions with Coyote, prostitutes union, cast off your old tired ethics, Palestinian Jews, people in different parts of the world, Ireland, Jamaica. So it wouldn't have, I saw myself like Huey in terms of a citizen of the world. And it's actually a fantastic way to grow up because you're much more open to people who have the shared experience of humanity versus your race or ethnicity or how you identify. And we really were raised in the principle of Che Guevara that a true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love.
Jakobi?
Well, there's too many misconceptions, so I try to limit them. But the most egregious one is, and I get tired of arguing with people about this, is they're not the black version of the Ku Klux Klan. I hear that everywhere I go. Oh, you Black Panther, you're racist, you hate white people. And that's the most egregious misconception. The party actually worked with any group, any poor and oppressed group, irregardless of race, which is quite different from most black power organizations of that period, of that time. Another misconception is they're solely the lumpen proletariat. No, the two founders were students. They're not criminals and thugs. They're veterans, they're organizers, they're students. And yes, they do incorporate, so quote unquote, the lumpen into the organization. Why? Because they understand that these brothers have issues and have already rejected the system in all these various ways because of this oppression. So they incorporate them, politicize them, and transform their ways of thinking to incorporate them into the movement. And so they're not criminals and thugs. And another one is, where the women? There's no women in the organization, or they are overly sexist organizations, which I'm sure we'll have a conversation about that today. And what's another one? And they're not just mentally trying to have a revolution for revolutionary sake. They see that America cannot live to its ideals of democracy. They respect democracy. If you read the 10-point platform, what's number 10? Anyone remember what number 10 is? Declaration of Independence. They see America as a contradiction, not living up to its ideals of a democracy because of capitalism. And so they are socialists. They see socialism being a more equitable system. And again, we keep going back to these issues of economics, but at the bottom, at the root of all these issues were economics. So those are some of the main misconceptions. And let's not divorce any of this from the Cold War and the ways in which the state responded, because the party did a great deal of highlighting all the contradictions of this so-called capitalist enterprise at the height of the Cold War. And so the state responded with a lot of these misconceptions that we have came from the state, from COINTELPRO, from a lot of these misconceptions, from their propaganda campaigns, and so forth and so on. And so, not to change focus, but much of what the Movement for Black Lives is dealing with is mirrors a lot of what was taking place 50 years ago, with some of these same misconceptions and the way in which the state and others are responding in this negative way.
Well, thank you for the segue. So Alicia Garza, whose name you all know from Black Lives Matter. Alicia, you have spoken so eloquently and written about what Black Lives Matter means. How did it start, and what are the misconceptions about Black Lives Matter?
All right, how much time do I have?
Yeah, well.
Well, first and foremost, it's great to be here with you all, and it's great to be here at this moment in history. And I feel grateful, right, that there are folks who are not just still here, but still active, that we can share these kinds of lessons and have exchanges about both vision, material conditions, right, and then also strategy, which is a big question that I hope we get into at some point. There's a lot of misconceptions about Black Lives Matter, one of which I think just comes from the fact that Black Lives Matter gets used to talk about everything, and it becomes really confusing. And in a lot of ways, it is both intentional, but then it's just also sloppy, right? So Black Lives Matter was initiated by myself, Patrice, and Opal in 2013 after Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted. We set up Black Lives Matter as a space for Black folks to have further conversation about what we can do to fight back against what we called anti-Black racism and state-sanctioned violence. We were very clear that this fight was not about just saving the lives of Black men, but that in fact it was about forging political space where we could be whole people, right? The other thing I think is really important in there is that after Trayvon is killed, there's lots of, well, both after he's killed and then also after his killer is acquitted, there's lots of uprisings that are happening. And this is really a part of a decade-long trajectory, right, of a rupture in this notion that we live in a post-racial society. Even under the first Black president of the United States, what we're finding with Hurricane Katrina, what we're finding with Troy Davis and the Jenna Six, what we're finding with Stokely Williams, and over again, right? CeCe McDonald, what we're finding with my sister Marissa Alexander, is that over and over again, we're being told that racism is over, that there was a great fight that happened, and that we got rights, and that now if we don't have rights or we don't have the things that we need, it's because we're not doing what we need to be doing, as opposed to it being about systems being able to transform themselves, right? And as opposed to it being about an economic system and a set of social systems that depend on Black people to be cannibalized, quite frankly. So I say all of that to say that the origins of Black Lives Matter is about a moment in time that is speaking to a set of contradictions very similar to the contradictions, I think, that the Panthers and other groups were trying to not just raise, but deal with and address and experiment with different ways of alternative living so that we could actually compete for the hearts and minds of our people. Also, what doesn't stop happening is Black people being murdered. So Trayvon Martin is killed, his killer is acquitted. Renisha McBride is shot in the face in Dearborn, Michigan. Prosecutor refuses to bring charges until there is lots and lots of demonstration and protest and, quite frankly, embarrassment of that prosecutor. Jordan Davis is killed in his car by a vigilante who doesn't like how loud his music is, and on and on and on, right? And Michael Brown is killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and many of us sitting here were watching those images on television and thinking that we were watching something that was happening in a developing country somewhere in the world, except it was in a small suburb of St. Louis, right? Tanks, rubber bullets, tear gas, all kinds of, it was really actually something that I think captured the hearts and minds of many people. And it was a rupture that was similar to the one that many of us experienced when we saw Black people stranded on roofs, swimming through floodwaters, being left in jail cells, right? And the United States government not coming to do anything. But yet, of course, we're in a post-racial society. So Black Lives Matter emerges in that context, and I think one of the things that we have continued to battle, particularly in the age of social media, is this question about, well, is Black Lives Matter a hashtag? Is it a social media phenomenon? Can social media kind of create movements? Did you all create a movement? Or is Black Lives Matter an organization? And the answer is all and none, right? So hashtags don't start movements, as we know. We didn't start this movement. This is a movement that has been in process for hundreds of years. This is a moment in a timeline, right, of active resistance and struggle. And it's hard to explain that to folks that don't understand movements because we're not taught about movements, right? We are taught sound bites of history where essentially our conditions have changed because Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus because her feet were tired, and then Dr. Martin Luther King led us to the promised land. That's what we learn. And so then in response, right, to this movement where there's lots of confrontation that's happening, lots of unapologetic Blackness that is being exhibited all over the place, I think we see a lot of the same responses to us that that my parents and my parents' peers say were the same responses that were happening at the time of the last period of civil rights, let me be precise here, which is that now everybody venerates what was happening, but back then, the majority of people in this country didn't like what was happening. So we deal with that a lot. There's lots of other, I think, misconceptions, but the ones that I'll just lift up really quickly is that there is I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but I find that comparisons between organizations have to happen within a historical context. And it's difficult to do very shallow comparisons to organizations that are very rich and complex and have complex histories and exist inside of a particular historical moment that we're not going to see again, right? So the moment where the Black Panther Party emerges is actually different than this moment, but the issues are linked. The issues are the same, but the responses and the ways that people are experiencing them are not actually the same. And that's okay. What we can learn from that, right, is the ways in which capitalism has advanced. We can learn from that the ways in which our understandings and our participation in systemic racism and white supremacy has changed, right? And we can also learn from that as long as there is oppression, there will be resistance, and each generation is going to figure out what the character, what the contours, and ultimately what the outcomes of that resistance are going to be. So I'll leave that there for now.
So that is, we could have a whole day with the four of you. We really could. Thank you. Princess Black, you are on the ground doing the work, doing the organizing. And I know you have a lot of things you want to talk about. We talked a little bit about the financing, now and in the past, and I don't know if that's where you want to go or if you want to add on to what Alicia was saying.
I think I'll add on to everything that everyone has said. Fast forward 50 years, and to me, we're still at war, and we're still in the same place that we were in 1966. The only thing that has progressed 50 years later is capitalism and imperialism and poverty amongst people of African descent and minorities, quote unquote, in general. I think it's imperative that we really take a look at 50 years ago and be honest about what 2016 is. When we talk about the Black Power movement in general, which you spoke of earlier, that kind of emerged from the Mississippi Delta with Stokely Carmichael, but you also have to call in Brother Willie Ricks as well, because Willie Ricks was really the individual that coined the term Black Power, and that was on the ground with the sharecroppers organizing and really priming the stage for Stokely in regards to Black Power. But when you look at the Black Power movement and when you look at the Black Panther Party, and you speak of Huey, who was, really big in theory, and we often play that down. You have to really think about now. A lot of what we do now in terms of organizing and social movements involves a lot of rhetoric, a lot of theory, but little to no practice. So we have a movement for Black lives or Black Lives Matter or whatever the case may be, but we're lacking so many elements in these movements. And I think that it's imperative that we really think about how do we take this theory from these spaces. So often, people who are intellectuals like myself, we sit on these panels and we talk about all these things in front of these people who already know something about the Black Panther Party, opposed to us having a conversation about the Black Panther Party and the survival programs and implementing those programs in Ward 8, in Ward 7, that are in Washington, D.C., where people need it the most. We talk about these things in these spaces, but we fail to go into the places where the Panthers or the Lowndes County Freedom Organization or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they were on the ground in the trenches and doing the work. Oftentimes, what our educated class of Black people tend to do here in this space 50 years later is a lot of rhetoric, a lot of theory, and a lot of talk, but we lack the practice that the Black Panther Party did. So when we have these conversations reflecting on 50 years ago, today we really have to think about how do we transfer these conversations into the community on the ground? How do we transfer the resources, the energy, the time, the intellect? When you recall Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, his call for the Black middle class, the educated Black people in this country, was to take our knowledge and our skills into the streets, into the communities, and uplift those other people. However, we have so many different variables and factors that has kind of built that wall between the people in the know with the skills and the resources and the people without. And so how do we break that wall down? How do we transfer these resources, this energy, back into the community in the same way that Huey, in the same way that Bobby Seale, in the same way that Elaine Brown, in the same way that the survival programs once did? For example, when we talk about Black Power, we can't have a conversation in Washington, D.C. without talking about Marion Barry. So you look at an individual like Marion Barry, brilliant, intelligent man, a chemist in 1960. I went to Howard University, and I don't personally know a chemist in 2016. I should, because we're graduating like the most chemists that are Black, I'm sure, because that's Howard's record. However, you know, when I look at that, it's just kind of like a chemist in 1960 doing the work. He emerged from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and that kind of transcends into Black Power. And Marion Barry and Black Power takes that into politics. When we talk about presidential elections, no, it's really about local politics. So you look at someone who came from the Black Power movement into local politics and really created a quote-unquote Black middle class here in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. How did he do that? By using survival programs. Marion Barry created Pride, Inc. Pride, Inc. provided jobs, health resources, skills, all of these different things. Pride, Inc. then transcends into a government program that is implemented and still in progress, that still employs people in the city of Washington, D.C. between the ages of 16 and 24 years of age every summer, giving people a leverage, the opportunity, and addressing the economic and the political issues is something that Marion Barry did. So how do we get that energy of our ancestors, of those who came before us, of the people who lived and died in the Black Panther Party? How do we take those lessons? How do we take that energy, and how do we transcend it outside of these spaces into the places where it matters the most? That's really what we have to focus on 50 years later.
Yeah. And that barrier capitalism is real.
So before we go on to our sort of next section, can you give an example of some place, some organization that is doing the work? Does anybody have an example of something to emulate?
I would say here, like when you originally opened, you addressed the issues of 1966, housing, police brutality, jobs, all of these things, same issues 50 years fast forward, except we have this romanticized ideal of Black progress, whatever that is to some. I guess it's someone like me who has a master's degree and whatever. But anyway.
But an example of something that you think is working now.
Of something that's working. There's organizations here, like in DC, Empower DC, who organizes in the community, who really fights the issue of housing here in DC, which is a huge issue because everybody in DC has a housing issue unless you, of course, make 100,000+. So they're on the ground, they're doing the work, they're taking their knowledge and skills and they're going door to door and they're grassroots organizing, which is what's essential. And like one of the things that we need to transfer over as well from the Black Panther Party is the political education. We often lack that. We have people walking around who claim they're organizing and doing all of these things, and they lack the knowledge that the Black Panther Party had. There were required readings, there was required knowledge. Like anyone could represent fully what the Black Panther Party meant during that time, whereas we have people that are organizing who barely know the mission of their organizations, who don't have a full understanding of the capitalism and the imperialism and all of these isms that we speak of, and don't really have a global picture of people and how they're being oppressed. So there's organizations here in DC, there's organizations in St. Louis and in Cleveland that are doing the work on a very small level, which is why I spoke to you about the issue of finance. So as someone who organizes and strategizes, and strategy is extremely important, I often see people organizing without strategy, and I'm just like, hey, read a book. strategy. But
And that's where we're going to go next is reading.
reading is fundamental indeed.
So, and this is something that Ericka said we were talking earlier about Erica's mother and people not reading. And so while we are talking about sort of the grassroots and people actually doing something, there also is the theoretician, there also is the educating yourself. So is there something that if you wanted to say sort of reading material, what do people need to read?
But also about what Princess said in terms of strategy. The organization that my mother started now in Oakland and the world, they currently employ formerly incarcerated and hard-to-hire people. She pays twice the minimum wage through a county funding, but it's people who would go back to what they were doing before and go back into the same cycle that's always worked against them. So right now they have an organic garden a couple of blocks away from where Huey was murdered. Eventually it'll be a 6-story apartment complex for people to own that space. The garden will move to the rooftop and it'll have 5 businesses inside. But she is the organizer of it, but the formerly incarcerated people who are the gardeners who are also learning master gardening programs. We have one guy who grows 12 different types of heirloom tomatoes. Some of them are being hired by other gardening area companies in Oakland, but right now they are the co-owners. She doesn't own any of it, and it took them a while to get used to the idea, but she had to have the strategy to say, this is your garden, you're gonna have to get together once a month, I'm gonna help you start the concept, but then you decide what's gonna grow, how we'll sell it. Obviously, right now in Oakland, we have an issue with Driscoll, so a lot of people are coming to the garden in Oakland and the world, but the strategy of what to do next has to be something concrete, because you could be angry every day easily because of just the history of the slaughter that Alicia has talked about. So I just wanted to mention that because when you talked about the strategy, it has to come from, it has to be a concrete thing.
Right. Wait, and Alicia, you said strategy is very important. What did you want to address with that?
Well, so I want to address some of the things that have been said because I agree. I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that, in my opinion, strategy also requires coordination, and that's what we don't have. We lack that. And I think there's a misconception in the movement for Black lives, right? That there are not organizations that are deeply invested and deeply engaged in the work in their communities. There are lots of different elements in this movement. And I would go so far as to say that I'm not sure that I would call this a movement yet because it is not as cohesive as it would need to be in order for there to be the degree and level of power built that we talk about and need movements to help do. So with that being said, I think the question of strategy is a big one. Black Lives Matter as a network has been around for 3 years, right? And oftentimes when we talk about, or at least the sound biting of history, right? One of those sound bites is, well, where's your landmark piece of legislation, right? Y'all have been around for 3 years, where's your Voting Rights Act? Where's your et cetera, et cetera? And the thing is, I love to just kind of get deeper and say, well, civil rights as a period was more than 40 years. More than 40 years. And this period, I think, is unique, not better, different, or worse, just unique in the sense that the role that COINTELPRO played in dismantling the strength, the vibrancy of organizations, and also the humanity of people cannot be underestimated. And what it has done is left big gaps in the infrastructure that we need to build powerful movements. And so that is something that I think we are grappling with, and it's a core part of what it means to build strategy today. When we have activists, and literally activists, I'm not even talking about organizers. You have activists who are being visited by the FBI, right? In advance of the Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention, just on the strength of being affiliated in some way, associated with Black Lives Matter, either as a movement or as a network or an organization that is somehow considered to be inside of that, right? The surveillance that people are experiencing on social media and the way that police and law enforcement are using social media as a tool to not only surveil, but also to criminalize, penalize, control, and to scare people out of being active in their communities, I think is something that's very important. And then the other piece in terms of just strategy is I agree with this question around what does it mean to build a base? And what does it mean to have a base that is not only conscious, right, but is also leading what local strategy looks like and connecting with other communities to build a national and a global strategy. We're just not there yet. We're just not there yet, in my opinion. So I agree that the gaps that are there are real.
And if I can add, I mean, just to echo many of the points that the ladies have already articulated, the party was great with the idea of putting that theory into practice, is what they argue. And today, we have a number of problems and why we have a lot of the gaps that we face. Many of which, I know I've sat in the room with many of these activists and organizers potentially. And as you mentioned these borders, you greatly articulated what's taking place here in D.C. On the local level. But as Alicia has indicated, there's a lot of folks doing that kind of work around the country as well in various places. I mean, Chicago, for instance, we don't have any legislation passed, but we just got rid of Anita Alvarez. And that's a grassroots activist. As a prosecutor, people are doing the work. But there are problems, and just this barrier you keep mentioning, I articulate that barrier as capitalism. There's plenty of times I sit in a room like this, packed, and ask folks, who all fired up for the movement, get right out here to do the work, and everyone's hands goes up. Then now who's ready to do it for free? And all your hands go down, and that's the problem.
And that indeed is the barrier. I think it's something that I read that Ericka said before, is that, you know, this generation is not ready for, you said you specifically referred to yours, I'll specifically refer to mine. This generation is not ready for a revolution because they are just genuinely too preoccupied with making money. And that is sometimes on our jobs, and I wouldn't say that I'm preoccupied with making money. I could walk away from my job today. It really doesn't matter. I'm more like a friend of SNCC at this moment versus a field person of SNCC. So I contribute my money to the movement as I'm working. But I think the real barrier is the fact that a lot of people who are activists or organizers or involved in this movement are like really preoccupied with making money off of the oppression of us. And we get into this, and that's through the expansion of capitalism, which is a disease.
Poverty pimping is real.
Poverty pimping is indeed, I feel like, one of those barriers in those brick walls. And I think that's one of the things that's hindering this movement. And it's like, for me and a lot of people in the audience and that may be watching online and that I know, one of the major questions is, and I spoke to Alicia about this earlier, is historically, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they grassroots collected, organized, and raised money, singing, dancing, whatever it was that we needed to do, we did in order to raise the money. The same with the Black Panthers. The money came from the community. We funded ourselves. Do for self was a huge thing, but then you fast forward 50 years later, and there's like a huge amount of money being dumped into this movement for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter or whatever the case may be, but it's like, where's that money and how does that connect to the community? Because if the Black Panthers had those type of resources, the jobs, the housing, the health resources that they would be able to provide would be astronomical. Another part of that wall is, and which is what the survival programs address, is the idea that really it takes our conditions supersedes our consciousness. So you can very well be down for the movement, but if you're trying to pay your bills and take care of your kids or, you know, like stay alive, find a place to live, like those are things that take precedence over the movement or this education or this knowledge or like whatever the case may be. And I think that's also a barrier. But
Can I ask a question, though?
absolutely.
Because I agree with you, and so my understanding of where the Panthers were funded was it was self-generated, but celebrities also gave the Panthers money.
A lot of philanthropy.
They got money from philanthropy.
Streams, some of it ill-gotten.
And so
Say
there's
again?
There are a lot of revenue streams, some of it ill-gotten.
Yes.
The newspaper was a huge vein, but that doesn't mean that the press the printing press was necessarily paid for. But what you said in terms of people, the two things both of you said, the intimidation that would keep someone away from associating, because like Black people, I live in Atlanta, now will act like they always loved Martin Luther King, but they did not.
They did not.
They thought he was a troublemaker and that he was going to, but they love to talk about how they love him now.
Right.
And for the Black Panther Party, the community saw that we were answering the call for a need. So then they would say, well, but there were certain classes of Black people who did not want to be anywhere near
Associated at
us
all.
or talk to us or be associated with us. But a lot of times, the thing is that you had to say, yeah, well, we're going to sleep on this floor. The way I was raised is in a dormitory, so I live with my mom on the weekends, but there are no part-time revolutionaries. So it really depends on what you're willing to give up. So are you going to stay up until 3 in the morning to get out this paper when Dowdell is killed? Are you going to, proofread it to make sure and then go out and sell it on a street corner where somebody might take them from you, a police might beat you up, set them on fire? So it really is what you're willing to do. I mean, I look at some of the things that my family did and I think, you must be insane. Because why would you give up everything for the concept, for an idea? But because that's what a theorist does and says, we put this into practice. But the idea of saying, well, yeah, I might not eat everything I wanted today so that 5 people can eat, it sounds like socialism, but then we all do. And you also can't read if you're hungry. You can't think if you're hungry. And if you don't have lights on. So you take care of some of those problems so that people can think. But reading was, I hate to say this, fundamental.
So I asked that question because I do think that I agree with that. And it seems like what you all were trying to do was build an alternative in real time, right? So that it could compete with people who feel like I'm not going to do this without getting paid for it, right? But I also think that it's important for us to be real that it does take money to do this work. And we have a critique of the nonprofit industrial complex and philanthropy, but movements throughout for a minute have been funded in many different ways. I think the question that you're raising is important, which is how is that money being used, and what's the word I'm looking for? What's the influence and control that philanthropy is trying to exert on these movements through funding them? Sure. And we also see backlash, right? So we get Breitbart articles. Black Lives Matter gets George Soros money. We don't get money from George Soros. We just don't. Even George Soros came out and said, I don't give them money. I love what they do. I don't give them money, right? Black Lives Matter gets $33 million, $300 million. Well, who are you talking about? Are you talking about 20 organizations? Are you talking about the Black Lives Matter Network? Are you talking about a chapter of the NAACP, which is calling itself Black Lives Matter? How are you be specific, right? And I do think that that is another way and another tool that helps us not actually have depth around what are the complexities in this movement, and what are the pressures coming from multiple directions. I think it's important for us to just be specific about those things, because to me, we do live in a capitalist society. And what was powerful and what still is powerful about the Panthers is that they were moving alternatives in real time, and they were also smashed by the state for doing that. Let's not forget that, right? So what does it mean to be living in an era of advanced capitalism, a system that is now much more global than it was during the height of the Panthers? And what does it mean for organizations or groups of people? It doesn't have to be, nonprofit organizations. We have very few political organizations like we did during that period. But what does it mean for alternatives to be trying to be built in this period of capitalism in this country by Black people? And what can we expect, right, in response from the state? And are we prepared for that? And I think the answer is no. And it's not just a question of whether or not people are too concerned about making money. It's also a question of how advanced the state is and how advanced the systems are that contain this nation state.
So that's a whole nother day
Or 2.
or two,
Or a week.
or a week.
Yeah, it's all intertwined.
So, and we have like 5 minutes before we go to questions.
Already?
And so it's like not enough time to do this. But before we go to questions, I want to just take up what you've said there. So like, what are the concrete things people say you've been around 3 years and why don't you have where's your voting rights legislation? But in fact, there's a legacy of the Panthers, and Black Lives Matter already has had an impact. And I just wrote down a few things. You brought the issue of profiling and police murders to the public consciousness. There's an impact on the 2016 election. The apology from Terrence Cunningham, the president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, I see you raising your eyebrow, but it would not have happened. And I want to hear what you have, but it would not have happened without Black Lives Matter. The Justice Department's announcement that there will now be a database of people who are killed by police or who die in custody, awareness of the militarization of local police departments. So there is already an impact. So I would just like for each of you to say, what is either the legacy of the Black Panthers or what impact has Black Lives Matter already had?
I'll take it. I think that in 2016, when we think of this movement for Black lives or the impact that it's had, I think that the thing that has been the impetus of it all is the people of Ferguson who didn't go inside when they saw injustice, and they stood and they stand there in those places, the people that joined them in those spaces. I think being able to watch on a national stage in 2014, people being tear gassed and shot at with rubber bullets. A friend, a sister, a colleague of mine in Ferguson was shot in the head with a low caliber bullet. It's gone. The police more than likely did it, but that's not a story that we're talking about. But it's the fearless people of Ferguson that really started this national conversation of police brutality, because we were able to watch it. We were able to see Don Lemon, regardless of whether we like him or not, being tear gassed and put in this state of war on national television. And so when you think of bringing all of these things to the national stage and how far we've gotten, and you mentioned apologies, but that's not progress unless it's in the form of reparations. And so that we can provide resources and those things that are really needed in our communities. So it's like a limited amount of progress. Okay, we got an apology, but that doesn't stop the bullet tomorrow. It didn't stop it today, and it didn't stop it the day before. Policies and apologies have been something that has been given to people of African descent since we got here. We're sorry. We apologize. And here we are. Where's the voting rights legislation? We need another one. Didn't our ancestors fight for that in 1960, 1950, 1940? Didn't we pay the poll tax for that? Why are we still dealing with these same issues? So it's are we going to learn from the past and do something different, or are we going to continue to replicate the same thing and keep going in the same vein, or how are we going to look at it? I don't necessarily see progress here. I see we ask for body cameras, but we have video footage all the time. What did that do? It lined the pockets of people who make the body cameras, because we don't have those contracts. You know what I mean? We just put more money into the machine when we get arrested and do all of these things. We're putting more money into the militarized machine that attacks us every day. So it's is there really progress?
And to your point, at least in Rodney King's case, there was a trial. It was just a joke, but now there are no indictments.
Process.
So it's actually, how can you go backwards from 1992?
Indeed.
Alicia?
Indeed.
We need a month more to have this
Yes,
conversation. We do. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think that the major accomplishments are that things are more visible to more people. I don't think that is necessarily a victory, but I think that it's an advancement. Mm-hmm. There was no apology from the president of the FOP. It was an acknowledgement of historical abuse, but there was no acknowledgement of current abuse or current, murder. And so we don't accept that, right? We can read. We've read this in history books already, that the police have a long history of enacting terror in our communities. And for him to not acknowledge the current reality of that in this moment in time was an indication of how much work we still have left to do. I think that, quite honestly, this is it's an interesting moment because I think it shows the diversity of thought, opinion, strategy, vision that exists amongst this movement in the making. And, I think that we have a lot of way to go to figure out how we can move together and have different ideologies, theories, praxis around how we do that. And I think that that's a lesson that folks are learning right now.
Jakobi.
Well, ditto on most of what's been said, quite honestly. As a historian, though, fall back on history, I see a number of legacies, and I want to first back up because I do study the party, the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party is one organization, a larger global phenomenon called Black Power, and we're leaving out a lot of more important folks, women especially. I'm thinking about the Black Arts Movement. There's a whole lot of legacies that I've ignored or we didn't get to talk about today, so I do at least want to acknowledge some of those. As far as the legacies are concerned, at least from the party, I mean, I grew up eating free breakfast in schools and so forth. Many of those staples that we now take for granted didn't exist before then. The legal clinics, now we get nonprofits and so forth to exploit some of those things. It's ironic. The way capitalism has a way of co-opting even the legacy of the programs that the party put forth. What I do see, like 50 years ago, Black Power, much of a international, transnational, global movement. As much as it might be one disagreement I have with Alicia, I do see the trend, and whether you call it a movement or not, I do see the influence as a global one that you ladies have created a spark that was there, but now folks have methods and mechanisms that you all have put in motion that folks around the world are emulating. I'm thinking about the student movement taking place in South Africa. I mean, folks always highlight the Palestinian movement, but it's all kind of things taking place, movements taking place around the world. And it's not a new phenomenon. Folks have been emulating African Americans in their struggles historically as a way of poor and oppressed people around the world using our methods and ideas and theories to combat their situation. So I do see that as part of this longer trend of liberation struggles in this timeline that you eloquently articulated. And I do see that movement in a global capacity now even more stretched as we don't have the Cold War we had 50 years ago. Now we have this global capitalism that's taking place, or America as this face of imperialism that's really imposing its will on poor and oppressed people. Especially we look at things like the environment, for example, and poverty. These are real tangible things that affect poor and oppressed people in all walks of life around this globe. And folks are adhering to, and I'm actually starting to hear rumblings in places I've visited. I'm looking at the history of the Panthers, like the Dalit Panthers in India or the Polynesian Panthers in New Zealand and some of these places I visited recently. Folks are on the ground are mimicking and some of the platform that Movement for Black Lives has articulated that we actually didn't get a chance to talk about today. Folks are actually looking at that now in these international locations as a model. Yep. So now there's a platform that's very, if you guys haven't read it, it's very detailed, it's very direct, it's looking at all these various economic issues that we keep talking about, and then there's a list of folks who are doing the work, policies, ideas, or strategies, and so forth. And folks are now mimicking that in at least some of the places I visited in Europe and South Asia and South Pacific. So it's very much a global phenomenon. And what I will argue that scholars like myself and others, which we have tried to do, continue to do, to go back to the earlier point you articulated about political education, what we have been trying to do in our various ways, and I won't list these folks, there's so many of them, is try to be that conduit for a lot of these activists or organizations or movements or networks, or however you want to articulate yourselves, as we all see ourselves as part of that as well, but movements have always been led by the youth. And so we are trying to, as I speak from, let me speak for myself. Let me not speak for all the other scholars to do this. As I articulate and participate in this movement, I try to make sure that I don't make the mistakes that the others in the past have made. Well, we come in as scholars and as older folks, and we paternalize the movement, and so we over-critique it. So we try to have exchanges with those activists and those networks about what we see, some of the mistakes and parallels that folks may be making that you might not be aware of, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Folks have been struggling for a long time, and then get out of the way and also have enough audacity to put our egos to the side to also listen and learn, and so we can also have a reciprocal exchange. And so we're making, or myself and others are making sure that that's what we also bring to this movement. That was a mistake in the past, not to critique King and some of these other folks, but they just couldn't let the youth lead, man, and that was a mistake in a number of ways. You have a lot of tension between the youth and some of those older leaders in those movements. So we had to make sure we don't do that now. And so I congratulated those actors when they jumped on the stage and took microphones from some of the more established spokesperson like Al Sharpton. And so I had no problem with that, man. You got to have those kind of exchange. You got to move to the side sometimes and let the youth lead and hear. I mean, and have the audacity to add where you can, because it's their movement and ours, man. It's their future. And so that's what I employ folks to do. You want to help, there's all kind of ways to get involved, not just donating money, putting foot to ground, doing active works. Even you intellectuals who have your critiques, well, take the time out and do the work. So I get a lot of flack for this as activist scholars. We are supposed to be, or activist scholars as a derogatory term in academia. We just want scholars, we don't want activists. And I always try to inform people, look, I love my job. I worked hard to get there. I've been on my own since I was 13, and I ain't supposed to be who I am in academia. But that's my job, man. That ain't who I am. So a lot of us, we get these PhDs, and they define who we are. We become that. And look, man, I'm a brother from Southside Inglewood. I'm going to get treated the same way whether I got that PhD or not when I walk those Inglewood streets. And so a lot of folks get these accolades, we forget where we come from. So in doing so, you got to make sure that you also let the youth lead, and you have an open mind to learn from folks as you try to impose your intellect on folks, and there's a lack of a phrase of explaining and unpacking that because I'm out of time.
He had I'm looking at him really hard. So. But thank you very much, Jakobi. So the good news is that we are going to be able to take questions from the audience, but we need you to line up at the microphones, yes, now that we have the lights on, because we had a long list of things that we were going to talk about. We were going to talk about the role of women. I wanted you guys to give us reading materials. We're going to talk about internal conflicts, the increased visibility of LGBT, queer folks in the movement that was not as visible. But maybe some of you will ask some of those questions. So we can take a question over here.
Hello, thank you. My name is Anthony. I'm actually born and raised here in D.C. Thank you to Sister Princess over there. She's really influential. I listen to your podcast all the time. But I have a remark and also, excuse me, a question. I agree with the sister. She did say that, systemic progress has not been made over the last 50 years. And also, if we're not talking about reparations, then there is no systemic process that's going to happen. But the question that I have is and you can answer this afterwards if you don't want to give the answer. With the evolution of COINTELPRO, with the Stingray program and also other scare tactics, how do we go about maneuvering and countering these issues and learning from what the Black Panther went through in order to have a successful revolutionary movement today?
In my opinion, you have to do it anyway. You have to know that you will be observed. You have to know that you will be threatened. You have to know that people will turn on you, that people will be planted in your life to do something to you, and be willing to go ahead and do it anyway.
Now to echo that, to echo that, we could come back to this issue of reading. Man, a lot of folks get involved and don't know the past, man. I mean, look, man, you got to understand, when you start making change, the state is going to respond. We're not the only remaining superpower for no reason, all right? And they're going to use all the resources at their exposure. So you have to learn from the past on how those things were implemented, so you can look for those things now and then project with the current state, with the Patriot Act and the NSA and social media and all the other ways in which my cell phone's probably recording what I'm saying now. You laughing, but you gotta be seriously, man. We do a lot of policing ourselves, right? You tell on ourselves now. We so quick to tweet every damn thing, which is one of my damn pet peeves. But we do a lot of our policing of ourselves. It's not by accident that the law enforcement use these apparatuses to surveil us, because it's not hard to find out what we are, what we're doing, and all of our phones got GPSs. And these companies that none of which we own have no problem in turning those records over to law enforcement without a warrant. And so you must be very proactive about understanding how these things operate, and then try to, the pessimist in me, maneuver through all that. It's a daunting task, but your freedom is worth it.
I echo both. I echo both sentiments. Just push forward. The only thing you can do is really prepare. You know, that's it. That's all you can do is prepare. And it's interesting that you bring that up. Social media. Social media. Who needs COINTELPRO when I know that you are sitting at the National Archives with Princess Ericka?
Live stream.
I know exactly where you are, exactly what you're doing. I know all the people you're affiliated with. I know the group. I know the people you talk to every day. Like, Google knows your flight. It knows when your bills are due. It knows, like, everything is, as an information professional, nothing is private. Nothing is private. Nothing is private. So push forward. That's all you can do.
And one last method, what the party would do. The party wasn't stupid, or folks in this period. They knew they knew somebody here's the police, and there's always one sellout. They're not blind to that. They know that's happening, man. It is what. So you have to have that mind state. And so one of the things that they would do after we had this conference, you have certain people try to weed out certain folks. We have a workshop in the back. Not everybody's invited to the workshop, man. It just can't be. We have a weeding out process, and you invite folks to do strategy, things we're not going to see on this camera, or what next steps are, and you do that in private.
Alicia, because you are the queen of social media, any?
I don't know, maybe the court jester. So one of the things that my elders tell me is that what they wish they had done was understood the state better. And I hear a lot of folks, joking. You're like, oh, you the feds. But I don't think that we really understand the way in which the state works. And so if we don't understand it, I don't know how we can protect ourselves against it. We don't have the same tools, machinery, et cetera, but I do feel like it's not deeply built into our work enough. So study and understand the state, and then also have protocols for safety and security. And there's lots to learn from various organizations. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, sir.
Chuck! Oh my God, let me just say something. This is Chuck Hicks. Chuck Hicks' father is one of the founders of the Deacons of Defense.
Hey.
Deacons of Defense is like one of the organizations that the Panthers definitely took some lessons from. Absolutely. Hey, Chuck.
Hi. Just my observation is to, I guess, stand in defense of the elders. But 50 years ago, the elders were young people. And when you talk about not wanting to give it up, one of the things that remind me about the elders during that time was that, of course, part of SNCC was unhappy with Martin Luther King. And they left and did it themselves. They started SNCC. And so young people were able to create some things and make some changes. And when they were not happy, some of them were not happy with the structures that they did, they didn't say, give it back, give it to us. They went out and they created what they thought would make it work. And what bothers me continuously is people say, well, elders don't want to give us this. They want to take control of this. Well, they worked for that. They made what happened happen. Whether it was good or bad 50 years ago, it is what it is. And if you're unhappy with what the elders are doing, go out and do it yourself. Create a new mechanism. I like Black Lives Matter because they took it and they're doing whatever they're doing. They're still trying to figure it all out. But at least they're not complaining, well, the elders got control of this and they won't give it to us. Stop begging. Take it yourself. Go out and create something that you think will work.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to go over to this side.
Hi there. So we very briefly touched on the use of the gun as a tool for self-defense. In addition to enacting effective community programs, one of the tools used by Black Panthers in 1960s Oakland was utilizing their constitutional right to bear arms, and more specifically, California's open carry laws, to effectively safeguard their communities against police brutality, in addition to informing individuals stopped by police of their rights. My question is, do you think these methods would be effective in combating police brutality in the present?
Well, here's two things. As soon as Black people became armed in California, the Mumford Act took those rights away. So for people who are concerned about gun control right now, if you want guns off the street, arm Black people, and they will, the situation will solve itself.
But really, when you speak of arming Black people, my question is, who is arming the Black people in Chicago when you never leave the city? I'm gonna just put that out. I'm not gonna speculate or say anything, but who is arming these people?
But in the history of the NRA, the only time in the history of the NRA that they ever advocated for gun control was during the Mumford Act with the Black Panthers. Yep. The NRA has never wanted to lose money except for when they saw Black people with guns. So it would be very hard to articulate why you should have that as a tool, but you definitely should. If you look at the current election cycle and you have people who say they're going to be poll watchers, and as he's saying, you have a right to defend yourself. So if you want to go and vote, but you're going to be treated like it's 1964, then you might have to respond like it's 1964.
I mean, I said something the other day. I firmly believe in the right to bear arms. When you look at the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, what was it, 2 years ago, like March 2015, the former president, because they got that brother out quicker than quick, the former president of the SCLC said, if the government and the state is not going to protect us, it's time we pick up the gun. They got him out quick. When the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference says it is time to bear arms, it's time to bear some arms.
And keep in mind, I was raised, I actually detest guns because I was raised that they are a tool, but a tool has a use and a purpose. So I'm just not one of those people that likes, I mean, my father made his own bullets, that kind of person. But if you are concerned with how you can protect your community, then you have to see how your community is being attacked.
I mean, the elephant in the room here is no one said it, is white supremacy. And quite honestly, protecting oneself in self-defense and bearing arms has always been an American phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's just when Black people do it becomes criminal, or people of color becomes criminal. That's another. White supremacists always use violence as a tool of control, and it's not by accident you have such groups who use open carry. You can defend the Republican Party any way that you want, but I'm sorry, you can find any racist, fringe, crazy, militia group, and I guarantee you they most likely belong to the Republican Party. And so understanding that in the ways in which the law, and I emphasize the law because that's what the party did. The Panthers knew the law from the federal law down to the local municipal code, yep. Right? And so you have to know the law. That's why the political education classes are so important. And just because you have the right to bear arms doesn't mean you have to. And even if you do, does not mean that you intend to use it to cause harm. And that's the problem. That's why I keep mentioning this. I mentioned the term white supremacy, because when you put black and gun in the same sentence or room, it means something totally different. And so you can have, as a person who now lives in the state of Indiana, Pence, and all the craziness, and from there, no offense to anybody from Kentucky, but I was there for 4 years, too damn long, dealing with all these Tea Party people. There are no gun laws. And so this idea of having an arm, or firearm is part and parcel for the court. So I own everything. In fact, I never leave home without it. If the brothers didn't have me going through this metal detector, I have it right now. Because I'm sorry, but I ain't going out like Mike Brown. These degrees not going to protect me. And I'm not telling you to have a shootout with the police, but personally, I'm not going to leak in the street, and I have a right to defend myself just like that cop does. So who defines the terms? That's why the law is so important, what you can and what you can't do. And I'm not advocating y'all go out and do that. I'm just speaking for myself. And so my family, my students, and they all hear me say this all the time. If you catch me without one, it's because I'm in a place where legally I can't actually do that. But according to the law, I can. And so you very seldom see me without it.
So I will just remind everyone we are in the National Archives where the Constitution is housed. And the next time you're here, please go to the Amending America exhibition that talks about all of the amendments, including the right to bear arms. Huh? It's open tonight? Oh. Well, the Amending America exhibition is open tonight. So there you have it. You'll be able to see these amendments and our rights. So we have about 7 minutes, so we'll take this question and we'll take one over here. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, I'll make it quick. First, good evening, and I wanted to thank you, all the panelists, for the time, the investment that you made this evening, and particularly Lilia as well for making this conversation possible.
I felt like I was at the kitchen table. I just feel so lucky to be here with them.
Yes, great. So full disclosure, I'm a graduate student, and I study the concept of philanthropy, and really looking at complicating the idea of philanthropy, because it did come up in your conversation, and oftentimes we think of philanthropy only in terms of like large organizations giving lots and lots of money. But I really want to ask the panel to talk about broadening the concept of philanthropy and bringing it back to the idea of love of humanity and how these movements, particularly the Black Power movement, 50 years in retrospect, and now the Black Lives Matter movement, can take up or is taking up this concept of giving of time, giving of talent and treasure and resources and all that that entails. Thank you.
This is why I love an archives audience. You always get something unusual. Please.
It doesn't necessarily apply for the Black Panther Party. I mean, what Alicia said was true. We, many revenue streams, including Hollywood, who didn't have a philanthropic heart, they found it fascinating to be in close quarters with Black Panthers, with the exception of Jean Seberg, who really genuinely believed in what we were doing, and so Hoover destroyed her in the Los Angeles Times. But in terms of philanthropy, we didn't we did apply for a few grants in Oakland as they were coming out for the school and for printing materials. But, you know, some of our medical supplies came by the back door. So I'm not sure that your question really applies to us, but we found philanthropy wherever it was. And sometimes from people in the street. If you know anything about Oakland, you know that the Players Ball started in Oakland. So if they paid for breakfast, we didn't say, well, no, we're not going to take that money.
All right. Thinking back to those issues, so if I'm talking about the Panthers in particular, I primarily study the Illinois chapter of the party. And they had a number of revenue streams as well. So it's not just grants. You had a lot of wealthy white housewives who participated in the movement, Lucy Montgomery, and a whole host of folks who donated money. You had comedians like Richard Pryor and others. You even had some lieutenant governors out of their pockets, with some of their kids end up being weathermen, but that's another conversation. And then you have the community themselves working. So for instance, the Illinois chapter had an LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, for their free breakfast program because the state was trying to discredit them by saying that they were taking these donations from the people and using it to buy guns and do other stuff with it. So they had an LLC so they can have a paper trail so people could donate. But also, I always use my grandmother's example. Most of these programs are run by the people. So the party began a lot of these operations, they organized a lot of these operations, and then the people sustained them and ran them. So I always use my grandmother's example. So the party, for instance, made a lot of money by selling the Red Book, the quotation from Chairman Mao. My grandma ain't read that Red Book. My grandma read the Bible, right? And so the party always articulated observation and participation. So my grandmother said, man, y'all reading that red book stuff, that socialist stuff, y'all got guns, I'm a diehard Christian American. Then, okay, Grandma, come on down to the free breakfast program at the clinic and see the kind of work that folks are doing. And before you know it, my grandma run that damn kitchen. Right? She run a whole program, and so the community becomes a community-run thing. And so one of the misconceptions is that that the party just solely ran these programs. These are community-run centers, community-run operations. So time and effort and money and donations matter, but these folks who get involved bring their own different revenue streams as well, right? And so my grandmother, for example, being a mother of the church, now the church is involved, even though they're not party members. And so you have all these various ways these organic ways of bringing these things to fruition. And how you move that forward in our current context is another dilemma.
Okay. I don't know that I'm not sure that I think that what you're saying is possible with certain elements of philanthropy. And I mean, philanthropy in and of itself just means giving of oneself, right? But I think in this context, philanthropy represents something very different. And so when we look at big philanthropy and even medium philanthropy, it is money that is being generated often off the backs of our folks, and it's not clean. It's not clean. So it's no more backdoor, I should say, than money that you would get off the street, right? And I think that's important to understand. And I do think that when we look at SNCC, and even all the way up through this current period, we see very specific instances of philanthropic institutions wanting to move a political agenda and also being tapped by folks in government and other people who are placed in high positions to make sure that movements don't do particular things, that they don't achieve particular goals. And so until that dynamic gets broken, I think philanthropy will always have a little bit of that thing on it. With that being said, I do think that one of the things that I'm excited about in this moment is the ways in which celebrities are stepping up. So if you look at Jay-Z and Beyonce, if you look at Prince, may he rest in peace. If you look at The Weeknd, if you look at Colin Kaepernick, right? You're seeing a lot more instances of celebrities stepping up. In some cases, I mean, lots of people will say, well, it's for their brand, but it really doesn't do anything it doesn't do a lot more to build their brand as it does to tear apart their brand. So in each of these instances, you're seeing people losing endorsements, losing money, and it's a test of their own commitment, right? How committed are you actually to making sure that these movements can function independently, right? When it means that you lose an endorsement from Nike, are you still down? You know what I'm saying? Like Beyonce and Jay-Z, for example, were able to withstand that because they own all of their own stuff. It's not contracted through other people. Harry Belafonte was a very similar way, right? And still is a big philanthropist in the movement. But I do think that it's important to just name that and to say that, you know, we're in that period where unfortunately, the other dynamic that big philanthropy kind of creates is that only organizations that are with those legal structures can access those resources. It's a big challenge that we face, right? We're not a 501c3. We're a fiscally sponsored project of a 501c3. But even with that, we're still not free to do what we want to do, right? Also, we are also philanthropists, right? So I mentioned that we're a fiscally sponsored project. Instead of, you know, the fiscal sponsor taking a fee, we donate that fee to movements in South Africa, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we break some of these patterns that exist. But I also just don't think that the idea that you were raising is quite possible yet because of how philanthropy is constructed.
So we actually are right at 8:30.
Well, can I add a bit?
Something
Just
really
small.
quickly.
I mean, but there is a concerted. There are some efforts by some people and some organizations, like, for instance, the Mellon Foundation. A couple months ago, I was in a room with, and first of all, none of us usually are in these kinds of rooms, trying to figure out what they can do within the constraints of what the Mellon will allow them to do, but they do want to get involved. And I mean, they're sitting on $6 billion and they want to use it for some of these causes. So myself and others in the room were privy to some of these conversations. I can't disclose much today, but there are some efforts of people trying to divorce themselves from these constraints to get involved in the movement as a mechanism or as a reason for the mistakes that they didn't do 50 years ago. So, right, so these things that they could have done, and now we can look back 50 years and see how that money could have been used in this current context to fight these injustices, and it wasn't. What can folks in those facilities do now within the constraints? So there's some conversations that are happening, but again, who controls the purse strings matters.
Yep. All right. So we are, because we're live streaming and because we need to stay within our time frame, I would just ask if both of you can quickly ask your questions and we can give quick answers. So just back to back ask them.
Sure. This summer, Black Lives Matter released its platform. Now that you've had a couple of months to think about it and reflect on it, what are the strengths and weaknesses of that platform?
Okay, and then let me get the other question, and then we can try to answer both of these together.
Hi, I'm a student at American University, and currently, in the past couple of years, have been events in which students feel physically and violently attacked through social media threats. And as a result, many activist groups on minority groups on campus have begun to see a movement and begun to work with protests. But as you guys had mentioned earlier, most of the time we end up sitting in rooms, talking to each other, saying the same things that we all already know and are for. So I guess my question to you is, as a student, what can we do to progress this movement? What can we read? How can we conduct ourselves in the classrooms with the microaggressions, with the professors who are not standing up for us? How can we forward this movement now on our campus? Thank you.
All right, so we have like 2 minutes, so there's one, I know.
I can answer her question in 30
but the
seconds.
good news is there's a reception afterwards. People can come up and talk. So something really quick to answer this, and then we can continue the conversation
I can answer
outside.
the young lady's question in 10 seconds. Read everything. Read everything. Look at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Look at the Black Panther Party. Look at the organizations that they partner with. You have to really study the intellectual and political genealogies of these organizations and these individuals that are part of those organizations. So it's like going to the Black Panther Party, looking at their reading list, looking at who their reading list was reading, and then you get into the depth of like what you should be reading and what you should really be studying. As far as like microaggressions and all of those things in the classroom, attend a HBCU. And the doors of Howard University are always open.
You get that at HBCUs too.
Right.
I mean, we do have our own issues, but I don't deal with microaggressions.
So let Alicia answer what have you learned since putting out the platform?
It's still really new, but it's important for folks to know that was an effort of more than 50 organizations and individuals. So that wasn't Black Lives Matter Network. It was a broad swath of folks. Lots of controversy around it, mostly around stance on Palestine. What I love about it, and I'm excited to dive into, is that it's calling for an end to the war on Black people. It's calling for reparations. It's calling for community control. And I think it's got a lot of concrete stuff in there that we'll be able to do locally and hopefully nationally.
Really quickly. Really quickly, because what merges those two questions is, as an academic on these college campuses, most of the folks involved in these movements are students from these college campuses, and the issues that you raise are real. And I can give you numerous. I'm sure there's many people of color who are academics in the room have the same problem that I do, all these students who come in their doors with these issues. And so it's sitting at the table in places like the Mellon. One of the things that I put forward is, if you can't get involved in the movement, we can at least get involved in academia in all these various ways to solve some of these problems that our students are facing so they can continue to participate in the movement at large.
Well, I thank you all. This has just been, just as scratching the surface We thanks, say it loud. They're going to close for us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Is this working? Thank you for attending our first major event for Say It Loud Employee Affinity Group. We also want to let you know that in the programs, we put their Twitter handles. So if you have questions for our panelists, you can tweet it to them. We just found out we are actually trending right now for the event.
And we'd quickly like to present these certificates of appreciation to our panelists and moderator. Thank you so much for all your time, and we loved it. It was great, right?
Media. Thank you.